July 5th, 2023. Well, I hope everybody, at least the domestic U.S. audience, which is most of mine, I think, had a good 4th of July, Independence Day. And so, at any rate, I'm going to kind of get back into some developments in the Ukraine war um, in this video. The Basically, one of the things that's kind of come up very recently is some controversy about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Apparently, for some time, there's been some fear on the part of the Russian side and some claims on the part of the Ukrainian side about that some kind of a attack will be made or demolition will be made to this plant releasing radioactivity. Um, and of course, I guess each side's pointing to each other, and this is sort of reminiscent of the Kakhovka Dam explosion. And at that time, at the time this came out, some time ago, a few weeks back, I came to the conclusion that I really couldn't tell which side did it. I could see the arguments for both sides in one way, but it was hard to tell. But I think as we look back on it now, I think we can say pretty clearly that it was the Ukrainians that did it. And the reason for that is because it gave them some tactical advantages, apparently. By eliminating the large body of water between their side and the Russian side, it allows them to make incursions. And the Adamski Bridge area, of course, in the past several days, they've been engaged in a limited incursion across the river, and there's been some combat there and losses on both sides. I think it's been contained at the moment, but now that the water is down and after a period of time in the sun, the ground in that situation is like this. I can tell from my youth when I lived on the river, and when the water level went down, it gets kind of crusty, and but eventually it gets to the point where people can at least walk across it. Whether it's suitable for heavy vehicles and tanks, I'm not sure. And so I think that's one of the motivations. And of course, the Russians lost their supply of water to the Crimea, which is one of their strategic objectives in this whole taking this area anyhow, was to restore that. So, and also a lot of Russian positions in the forward areas on these islands were washed away, and apparently some Russian troops even drowned in this whole mess. So I'm pretty sure that they didn't do it, and I think that the Ukrainians did that. And so here we get to the Zaporizhzhia reactor thing, which there's a lot of stir, and Zelensky just made a speech on it very recently about claiming that the Russians were going to blow this thing up as some kind of a thing, and then that's after we had Senators Graham and Blumenthal talking about a resolution that we would enter the war against Russia if they blew up this reactor and create radioactivity that would go to, I guess, NATO countries. Well, there's no reason at all that Russia would blow up this reactor. This is insane. First of all, it's behind their defense line, which has been holding for the last month. So why would you blow up a reactor behind your own defense line? Unless they and at the present time, I mean, it's under the monitoring of the International Atomic Energy Commission, so or excuse me, agency. So I mean, they're monitoring, and nothing is really going wrong as far as that goes. And so it just doesn't make any sense at all that Russia would do that. Furthermore, if it did happen, not only would, of course, the international community would blame them, whether they did it or not, and also the prevailing winds are such that would blow over their areas that they control, including their rear echelon. So just again, that's absurd. Now, it's hard to believe that the Ukrainians are so desperate and crazy they would really do this. And also, they don't have any real access to do what's being discussed anyhow at the moment. So unless they conquer the area around the plant, it would seem like that would be an unlikely thing to happen. If they were to do it, they could do something like launch a Storm Shadow missile, which might be able to blow it up, or maybe I've heard about some kind of a ballistic missile, which I didn't even know they had, but if they have it, maybe that could be a possibility too. But these containment buildings are very hardened, and so it would take some serious, weapon to do this. It's possible. Um, on the other hand, it's probably they just want to raise the specter of it to create political support because there's the upcoming NATO conference and on the July the 11th and 12th, and they're obviously hoping to get more aid out of that. So I think that's perhaps where the motivation comes from. At any rate, we'll have to wait and see, and let's hope this doesn't happen. Okay, if you like these videos, please give me a like, subscribe, and we'll forward to anybody that might be interested. So, getting back to the general thrust of the war otherwise, I think that we've now completed about over a month of combat here since the Ukrainian offensive has started. And while they have managed to make some gains, there's no doubt about that, I would say that in general they've mostly shut down the bulk of Russian offensives that were going on. There are still some in the northern area south of Kharkiv that are still occurring, but on the whole, it's sort of thrown the Russians on the defensive, I would say, and they've taken some ground, not a lot, a few villages, most of which are probably deserted and blown up anyhow in the previous fighting, but they're important at the degree because of crossroads and things like that for supply routes. But they're very minor penetrations, really. So and certainly they haven't even, in most places, even reached the first line of defense that Russia's put in place. There's a few places in the western area, in fact, kind of south of Zaporizhzhia, the city, where they've kind of actually barely reached the fortifications there. But in other areas, they haven't even reached them or come that close yet. In the Robitska area, in that particular front, they've come pretty close to the town, but they're not in it yet, I don't believe. And so, but you see what I'm saying, that they've taken some fairly heavy losses in equipment. In fact, now the Ukrainian attacks of the recent days have turned into more and more just infantry attacks, and I guess night attacks and things of that sort on foot, which of course, but they're not really achieving that much actual success, I would say, and that's kind of interesting. So we have to ask, what are they doing at this point? Well, I tend to think when you really look at this, and we'll find out. I mean, maybe tomorrow something big will happen, and we'll go, well, my thinking's a little off here. But to me, I think what's involved in is that these operations are more or less political in nature. That is to say that the West, the United States particularly, and other countries, Britain and Germany and so forth, have invested a lot in them. They provide a lot of equipment, armored vehicles, artillery, ammunition, missiles, all sort of things, and a lot of money, just cash money to keep their government afoot. And some of that, of course, has been pilfered, as you can imagine. But essentially, they have to show something for it, and everybody's been waiting for the spring offensive, and spring pretty much ended. Almost was close to ending, and finally they launched an offensive. They had to do something, so they did. And I think they're conducting it in a way so that they show some effort. They're going to take some losses, but they don't want to take such losses, so catastrophic losses, that they actually could be thrown on the defensive in a way that which the Russia could really take advantage of the situation. I think they want to still keep enough capability so they can still continue to maintain the defenses, which we saw they were able to do during the winter. And so in order to not make themselves vulnerable, the idea is, don't throw away anything of great value at this point. And when you say, well, what about the human lives involved? Well, that seems to be the way the Ukrainian government and maybe the Russian government too is looking at this. I mean, everybody accuses the other of doing this. So. But I think that is what I see in work, and the target here is that big NATO conference I mentioned before on July 11th and 12th, where they hope to get some concessions, new weapons, more powerful weapons. They've been begging for F-16 jets for a long time, and so I think they want to get as much of that as they can, probably more money to support their government's efforts and so forth. And I think that's what this is about. And there's also just the ongoing contest of wills. You're in a relatively static war strategically. neither side has been able to make any major gains since the offensives of last September the Ukrainians had against the somewhat diminished Russian forces after their 6-month conscript volunteers, we want to call them, went home. And I think at that point, since that time, things have been pretty static. The Russians mobilized large numbers of reserves and have been able to deploy an effective defense line. And at that point, this has just turned into a grind on both sides. So that's kind of what I think where we are, and we'll have to see what happens next. But I would tend to think that in the coming week, there probably will be increased Ukrainian offensive operations. I would tend to expect in order to make a good show for the conference, and then after that, unless they're very successful, maybe things will wind down. Again, that's just speculation, but I think that once they know what the outcome of those decisions are, then that will color their actions going forward. At least that's kind of my take on the conflict at this time. We're still kind of in the aftermath of the Russian coup attempt, so we just don't know what's going to happen there. I was kind of joking around that this Prigozhin sort of like, what to do in Minsk when you're dead. It'll take off on a really weird movie from years ago, if you can recall, about Denver. So the things to do in Minsk when you're dead. Is he waiting for the assassin to come for him, or is he actually safe there? I don't know. It's hard to know what the situation. I mean, the Russians apparently want Wagner for their operations inside of in Africa. And I suppose I've heard different things about Syria. One thing said they were disarming the people in Syria, but it doesn't make any sense. Why would they want to shut down their Syrian operation? That seems like that could be useful too. Although there could be some issues there. But what about all the other ones that are in the Russian territory? Are they really going to Belarus? Are they really going home? Are they really being disarmed like some people say they are? And disarm means what? The heavy equipment, or do it mean the rifles as well? If those that sign a contract from the Russian army, what kind of deal do they get? Do they go in as a private, or do they go in as maybe a corporal or a sergeant or something like that? I mean, maybe a squad leader or a team leader of some sort. I don't know. They have a lot of experience over your typical Russian trooper, I guess. And so you'd think if they put them in there, they'd want to put them in some useful position, maybe. But that's something we're still kind of waiting to see what happens on that. There's a lot of, you're having some ongoing, drone attacks on both sides. The big ones, the big one, I guess, is more the Russians have more drone capability, but 5 of them headed toward Moscow again, and, kind of a symbolic attack. And there's some kind of fear of some kind of a terroristic attack on the Kursk bridge, which has caused a big backup in traffic. And some people are saying that they're afraid Wagner will do something, and I don't know why they would do that now, but who knows? I would think it'd be more likely some Ukrainian special forces group that would be doing it, because they did it before, right? So so we'll see. So that's kind of the situation as I see it on the conflict, and I'll try to keep abreast that I kind of alternate between this and other topics. I haven't gone into a whole lot of detail about Hunter Biden and all that. I think we all know what that is. It's a farce, of course, the way it's been treated. Clear corruption on the part of the Justice Department. They're clearly letting him off the hook. They deliberately waited the whole 5 years and let the statute of limitations on some of the actions just expire. Well, that's being handled in Congress. We'll have more hearings on that, but I thought I might mention that. Yes, I do follow that too, but I don't know if that's what people are most interested in or not. At any rate, I'll be wrapping this up for now. Of course, I'll post it on Rumble as usual, and the links to my social media accounts are in the description below. And you can follow me from time to time on Twitter, and so on the other ones, particularly on Twitter, I tend to put the kind of updates, things I do between videos if I see something important or just totally other topics I might want to come up with. So until next time.